Afternoon, Donald Trump looked into the mirror and made a decision. Should I be presidential, act and speak the way others want me to be, or should I be me? Well, me won the battle. The man we saw this afternoon was the man elected last November, the man who is now our president. Like him, hate him, trust him, or fear him, that's your call. He made his call today at 4 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time. He's going to be 100% Donald Trump, issuing a fusillade of counterattacks against critics who say he didn't do enough to condemn white supremacists. President Trump defended his statement of Saturday that both sides are to blame for the escalation of violence, saying that the left bears responsibility in addition to the alt-right.
What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt?
Let
me ask you this. What about the fact they came charging with clubs in their hands, swinging clubs? Do they have any problem? I think they do. You had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now.
Well, he sure did. Here's what the president went on to say when he was asked specifically if he draws a moral equivalence between the counter-protesters and the white supremacist demonstrators.
Are you putting what you're calling the alt-left and white supremacists on the same moral plane?
I'm not putting anybody on a moral plane. What I'm saying is this. You had a group on one side and you had a group on the other, and they came at each other with clubs, and it was vicious, and it was horrible, and it was a horrible thing to watch. But there is another side. I do think there's blame. Yes, I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. And if you reported it accurately, you would say.
Well, he condemned the man now held responsible for the death of one counter-protester, but he said many of the demonstrators were not neo-Nazis or white supremacists. They merely wanted to preserve monuments to the Southern past. He said they were treated unfairly by the media because many of them were there peacefully to protest the removal of a statue of Robert E. Lee. Here he goes.
You had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly.
You were saying the press has treated white nationalists unfairly?
No,
I just don't understand what you were saying.
No. There were people in that rally, and I looked the night before. If you look, there were people protesting very quietly the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. But you had a lot of people in that group that were there to innocently protest and very legally protest because, you know, I don't know if you know, they had a permit. The other group didn't have a permit. So I only tell you this. There are two sides to a story.
Well, the president's press conference late today quickly won him praise from white supremacist David Duke. The former Grand Wizard of the KKK tweeted, "Thank you, President Trump, for your honesty and courage to tell the truth about Charlottesville and condemn the leftist terrorists in Black Lives Matter and the anti-fascists." Well, a senior White House official tells NBC News today that members of the president's own team, were stunned tonight by his actions in that press conference and remain so, apparently. Joining me right now is NBC's Hallie Jackson. Jonathan Swan is a political reporter for Axios. Heidi Presley is a senior political reporter at USA Today and an MSNBC political analyst as well. And Jason Johnson is a political editor of The Root and an MSNBC contributor. Hallie, you were there today. Tell us about the circumstances and why you, as a Trump expert, you've reported on him so well, so long. What was it? Was it his id that finally broke out and said, "Damn it, I'm tired of playing Mr. President. I'm going to be Donald Trump as president"?
So let me just walk through chronologically, briefly, Chris, how this unfolded, because I think it might give you some insight into how this went down, which is that the president was supposed to talk about infrastructure. That was the ostensible reason for him coming down into the lobby of Trump Tower. They set up the podium. For the first time, the presidential seal in the lobby. The president came down flanked by his top advisors, cabinet-level people like, for example, Steven Mnuchin, his Treasury Secretary, his Transportation Secretary, Elaine Chao. You might have seen it. I think they played it live on this network. The president talked a little bit about his infrastructure plan, and then brought up Mick Mulvaney. There was a question, I think there was an anticipation among reporters who were, I would say, 25 feet back from the president of, hey, will he take some questions? Because remember, last week at Bedminster, he did. He stood and talked with, at that point, members of the pool. This was something where other members of the press could get in as well. He called up his budget director and said, and I'd be happy to take some questions on infrastructure. The questions he answered were not on infrastructure. The questions he answered were, as you just played, almost exclusively about how his words are impacting his agenda, what he said, how he plans to heal or try to heal as he talks about wanting to do the racial divide in this country. And perhaps most explosively, and what was an extraordinary back and forth, this idea that he blames both sides for the violence. This was, listen, I've been in presidential, sort of these interactions with President Trump as a candidate during the transition, during the administration. He was fired up. He has seemed in the last week or so like he has wanted to engage with members of the press more. He certainly seemed that way in Bedminster on Thursday, Friday. His new chief of staff, John Kelly, let him. Essentially, even after his press secretary last week held up a sign and said, last question, he went on for another 10 minutes. Nobody was trying to hold up a sign in this instance because of how sort of high you could feel the moment, right? The president responding to these questions, making these remarks. And I would just say this, John Kelly stood off to the side. I actually did not see him because I was sort of, lasered in on the president. But my producer and our cameraman who were there were said afterwards, you got to see these images. And John Kelly is standing there at one point appearing to do almost a double take, at one point lowering his head and folding his arms. And I think that is indicative because you're right. This was never supposed to happen, the president answering questions. He was not set to do this. And one senior White House official tells us he basically went rogue.
Yeah, that's for sure. Thank you. Hold on there, Howie. Let me go to Jason. Jason, It seems to me that the president made an impossible argument tonight. He said that those people who were just old Southern sympathizers, reenactors, basically, they somehow were there standing next to guys using Nazi salutes, Nazi slogans, and somehow were innocents. That's a hard argument to make.
Yeah, these weren't a bunch of ladies from the Historical Society coffee clutch saying, we don't want to get rid of this because we have our picnics here. Look, Chris, I've been saying this for a year. You look at Steve Bannon, you look at Stephen Miller, you look at Gorka, you look at the president's relativism when it comes to Nazi attacks. The president of the United States is a terrorist sympathizer. He sympathizes with these groups. He gives them a space in our society that no previous president has ever done, and it is a national security threat, and we need to make that clear.
Well, he did point out that the person who alleged now to have killed the person in the crowd, Ms. Meyer, is a murderer and a killer. I mean,
but not
very
a terrorist.
Clear. Well, his choice of words. Anyway, joining me right now is Sophia Nelson, former White House GOP committee counsel and author of the book E Pluribus Unum, E Pluribus One, actually, Reclaiming Our Founders' Vision for United America. Thank you so much, Sophia. Give us a sense. What do you make of the president's defense that some of the people in the protest group down there in Charlottesville over the weekend were, in fact, good guys, basically? That's what he seemed to be saying. They weren't all Nazis, weren't all white supremacists. What do you make of that argument?
Well, Chris, it's clear he went rogue, and I don't think any of us can argue with that. And for me personally, as someone who's been a lifelong African-American Republican my entire adult life, inspired by Jack Kemp to join the party in college, I can tell you that this is a very disappointing moment for me to see a Republican president of the United States actually miss a major moment to bring this country together in the wake of what is unmistakably domestic terrorism, supremacy, Nazism, and to hesitate to do all this footsie he's doing. I'm not sure what's going on with him, but I think he's done a very devastating thing to this country today and to the Republican Party.
Yeah, this looks like Athens and Sparta here. They certainly the people that, with the Nazi regalia on were the Spartans here. They're the ones looking for the fight.
Chris, the thing is, if the Nazi slogans and chanting wasn't enough to convince you that these weren't just innocent bystanders, they were carrying torches. Anybody who took a basic history class
Nuremberg
in grade school knows what torches represent in our history, and it is something very
well. Two
ugly.
things: it represents the KKK and the Night Riders. It also represents the Nazis and their demonstrations in the 30s.
And this is a moment, I think, for the GOP. It is notable that we are hearing silence at this point. I think many are in shock, and they're going to have to come up with a way to respond to this, because this is not going away. These people are emboldened. You saw David Duke's
statement. I got to get back to the question of Donald Trump himself. Hold on there, Jonathan. Howie, here's the question. Donald Trump, I thought when I got up this morning, read all the papers, I said, Donald Trump feels like he's in a straitjacket this morning. He hates being this guy that said what he said yesterday because he didn't believe what he said yesterday. He didn't believe believe that he was going to be this perfect president, politically correct president. He didn't want to be the guy that said, oh, the hard right were the bad guys and the other people were the good guys. So he woke up this morning and said, damn it, I'm going to break out of this straitjacket. I'm going to be me again. And there he was today. Why do you think he decided? I think he was never going to be happy pretending to be a regular president, that he was only happy being Donald Trump. And he made his choice late this afternoon. Your thoughts?
My thoughts are these, Chris, and it's based on our reporting, which is that this day and actually these next couple of days were and have been supposed to focus on the president's agenda. When you talk to people inside the White House, and frankly, even people close to this administration who have frequent conversations with the president and his advisors, they all talk about wanting to get something done, something productive done, which, with the exception perhaps of the Supreme Court pick of Neil Gorsuch getting on the court, it's tough to point to a legislative accomplishment, as you know, that President Trump has. So remember what happened up in that room today. Hours of discussion about tax reform, according to one person in the White House, and then hours, or at least some period of discussion about this infrastructure plan that he had rolled out. He wanted this week to be talking about veterans. He wanted this week to be talking about some of these issues that he wants to move forward on his agenda. But here's what happened, and here's what's happened previously in this administration. What the president wants to do was overshadowed by what he said. That has been a pattern that has repeated itself over these last 7 months. Republicans on Capitol Hill so far, Chris, you saw Cory Gardner's town hall this morning, so far have stuck by him, despite being, as they say, disturbed or dismayed by some of the president's remarks. And remember, they get back to the Capitol in 2 weeks, and they got a real heavy lift come September when it comes to policy.
Okay, Jonathan, I want to talk to you about this. That's important. Trump's failed to do what he knows he has to do, which is stay on course and actually get something done. But the whole world heard what happened today. The whole world watched the President of the United States basically say there's an equivalence morally between people waving Nazi regalia, speaking in Nazi slogans, giving the Hitler salute with people that protested what they were doing. That is an astounding development. And it takes us way back to square one on Saturday when that was his gut instinct to do just that.
Yeah, I was just talking to a senior White House official who sympathises with, the argument about statues, but they said this is not the time to make that argument. And
that's an argument you make in the Charlottesville City Council meeting when they decide this stuff.
Right. And look, this is Trump's core. This is his gut. This is Steve Bannon. Like, Steve Bannon and Trump are completely aligned on this. And my reporting today is that Steve Bannon has been arguing, and look, he's not with Trump, but
Trump says he hasn't been talking to him.
Well,
he said it today.
I hate to tell you, my reporting is that they have spoken by phone on the weekend, and
so he's lying.
You can't blame this on Bannon. This is Trump.
I'm not blaming it on Bannon.
Trump.
Just let me explain. I'm saying that they are of one mind on this, and Bannon's view is that by coming back and saying, these people are terrible and condemning them, Bannon's view is you're doing what he did during the campaign with the deplorable.
That's a big story today because he said we'll see what happens. In other words, the guy's already headed under the bus. Anyway, the president also defended his prior statements about Charlottesville, saying he didn't want to talk about it because before he knew the facts. So he's claiming Donald Trump is saying that Donald Trump needed to get all the facts before he spoke. Now, there's a remarkable statement by that guy, a lack of self-awareness. But let's listen to that.
I had to see the facts, unlike a lot of reporters.
Nazis were there.
I didn't know David Duke was there. I wanted to see the facts. And the facts, as they started coming out, were very well stated. It was very important to me to get the facts out and correctly, because if I would have made a fast statement, and the first statement was made without knowing much other than what we were seeing. The second statement was made after with knowledge, with great knowledge. There's still things, there's still things that people don't know.
So this president, as we just heard now late this afternoon, Heidi, said, I didn't have adequate knowledge to speak on Saturday. That explains why I didn't condemn the bad guys, the Nazis. But then when I did discover all the information today, I defended the Nazis. I mean, I defended in a sense that they're morally equivalent and blame both sides. And I'm just wondering, what good did the information do if he ends up going right back where he was the first time? And by the way, since when has he needed information?
Well, the thing is, the torches and the Nazi slogans were kind of enough evidence for most people, including his daughter, including his vice president, and including many GOP senators to feel comfortable that they had the facts about what was going down there. So I think when members come back to Congress, this is going to be a really difficult moment because we've talked all along about Trump's racial or economic angst to people who are flocking to him because of economic angst, this racial narrative is metastasizing, and it's not going away. There's going to be something this weekend potentially in Boston. There's a permit request for Richmond.
Let's take a look at this. Here's an example in this question of David Duke. It always pops up at the worst moments in our history. David Duke shows up. It shows how the climate's changed a bit when it comes to dog whistle politics. As the president said today, David Duke, the former Grand Wizard of the KKK, was in attendance this weekend at those demonstrations alongside those neo-Nazis and other white nationalists. But back in 1991, when Duke was trying to get elected as governor of Louisiana, he publicly denied expressing any admiration for Nazism. Let's watch how Tim Russert tried to hold Duke accountable for his past statements during an appearance on Meet the Press.
What was it about this country, this society, that you chose to become a Nazi? What did you find so offensive and so objectionable about the United States of America that you found Nazi Germany to be preferable?
All right, first off, I was never a member of the Nazi Party or anything like that.
Do you still think that Adolf Hitler is the greatest genius? Excuse me. Do you think he's the greatest genius in the world?
I never said that.
Well, you did.
Well, as a candidate in February of last year, Donald Trump refused to promptly condemn David Duke after he endorsed his candidacy. Watch this.
I don't know anything about David Duke, okay? I don't know anything about what you're even talking about with white supremacy or white supremacists. You wouldn't want me to condemn a group that I know nothing about.
That I know nothing about. Know nothing about David Duke. Well, Trump professed to know nothing about David Duke in that interview, but he clearly knew who he was back in 2000 when Trump specifically condemned Duke as a racist and a bigot. Watch this.
What do you see as the biggest problem with the Reform Party right now?
Well, you've got David Duke just joined, a bigot, a racist, a problem. I mean, this is not exactly the people you want in your party.
Sophia, this president seems to have a tactic that when he doesn't want to deal with the racial issues of the racist himself, David Duke, he has a failure of memory. And he's done it before. He's did it again today. I didn't know Duke was there. I don't even know who Duke is. Oh, yes, I did 17 years ago when I talked about him as a bigot and a racist. This failure of memory is very convenient for a guy that's very uncomfortable with this situation he's in.
Well, more important to me is the failure of moral leadership. When George Herbert Walker Bush was president of the United States of America, he had no bones about condemning David Duke. He was unequivocal in his language. When he was running for the Senate, he wouldn't support him. He wouldn't endorse him. He said he didn't want him in the Republican Party. And so Donald Trump does have selective memory on that. We agree, Chris.
Well, what about selective memory when it comes to Willie Horton ads in 1988? The Bush campaign ran those. Do you think that was? You should remember that.
You talking
Shouldn't
about George Herbert Walker Bush?
Horton? Shouldn't we all remember Willie Horton? So don't say that George Herbert Walker Bush is immune to this problem.
No, Chris, I don't argue a point with you on whether or not Willie Horton was appropriate. We agree. But what I am saying is that we're talking about Donald Trump and this moment in history. And what I think we ought to be focused on is no Republican president in my recent memory, and I'm 50 years old, has ever done what I saw done today, where he equivocated and said that white supremacists and Nazis were the same as people protesting against them. We have a young woman who's dead, 20 people injured in Charlottesville, and this president of the United States has embarrassed all of us regardless of party. That's
well,
where
you're
I
a
am
young
on
woman,
this.
of course, and I don't mind challenging you on a couple of these points of history, seriously. But Ronald Reagan, who had many things going for him in history, and he will go down in history pretty well, we know that.
Right.
But he was out there talking about welfare queens all the time, and we know what color they were. They were African-American. Welfare queens was his game.
Right.
He talked about young bucks, that was his word, waiting in line to use food stamps for gin. We know that game was played. It was playing race. It was more than a dog whistle. It was a bugle out of the American cavalry, and everybody heard those calls. So it didn't start with Trump in terms of playing the race card. Let's be honest.
No, Chris, look, I've been in the Republican Party a long time, and we can talk about the 20, 30, 50 op-eds I've written in every major paper in this country about my issues with the GOP and the fact that it has been a party that has gone away from its roots. After the Nixon Southern strategy, you know the party's flipped personalities.
I can recite it to you, line and verse.
Yeah, and it's a problem. So on that, I'm not going to argue with you that we haven't done what we need to do, but today is a very dark moment for the Republican Party.
Thank you, well
dark.
said. Thank you. Well, it's great to have you on. Please stay.